The city moved with a frantic rhythm. It was the 1920s. New York hummed. Cars honked on wide avenues. The streets were a river of people. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere important. Tall buildings scraped the clouds. They were monuments of steel and glass. They gleamed in the bright sun. The air itself felt electric. It was filled with the promise of something new, something big. It was an age of invention and ambition, an age where anything felt possible. From open windows, jazz music spilled out. It was the soundtrack of the city, fast and loose, carefree and bold. Inside clubs, people danced with wild energy. Laughter echoed in grand halls. The ticker tapes never stopped their chattering dance. They snaked through brokerage houses. They carried numbers that spelled out fortunes. Money was the new religion, and Wall Street was its high temple. People believed in the magic of the market. They saw only the climb, never the fall. Every day brought a fresh wave of hope. Ordinary people felt the pull. Teachers, factory workers, shopkeepers. They heard stories of easy riches. They saw their neighbors buying new cars. They heard the talk of endless prosperity. So they took their savings, they took out loans, they bought a piece of the dream. Stocks were not just for the wealthy anymore, they were for everyone. President Calvin Coolidge had said, "The chief business of the American people is business." And the people listened. The market climbed higher and higher. It seemed to defy gravity. Each morning, prices opened higher than the day before. Financial leaders were hailed as heroes. Men like Charles E. Mitchell of National City Bank became household names. He was the man who brought stock ownership to the masses. He made it seem safe. He made it seem patriotic. This was the new era. A permanent plateau of prosperity. The music played louder. The lights shone brighter. The climb seemed to have no end. But beneath the bright surface, a darker current flowed. The city's shine cast long shadows. In those shadows, deals were made. The game was rigged. Behind the heavy oak doors of private clubs, the real rules were written. The air was thick with cigar smoke. Men of immense power gathered in small groups. They did not shout like the traders on the floor. They spoke in low, measured tones. They shared information that the public would never hear. A quiet word here, a knowing nod there. Fortunes were decided before the market even opened. These men used tools the average person could not access. One such tool was the pool. A group of powerful insiders would secretly agree to buy a stock. They would trade it heavily among themselves. This created the illusion of high demand. The ticker tape would show a flurry of activity. The price would begin to rise. Outsiders would see the climb. Fearing they would miss out, they would rush to buy in. The insiders created the wave. Then they rode it. This was not investment. It was manipulation. Pure and simple. The laws were thin, like a fishing net with holes big enough for whales to swim through. There was no Securities and Exchange Commission, no real watchdog. Insider trading was not even a crime. The men at the top believed they were masters of the universe. J.P. Morgan, a legendary banker, once famously said, "A man always has two reasons for doing anything, a good reason and the real reason." The public was given the good reason. The real reason stayed in the smoke-filled rooms. This created a market built on lies. The value of a company no longer mattered as much as the story told about it. Speculators bought stocks not because a business was sound, but because they believed they could sell the stock to someone else for a higher price. They bought on margin, borrowing up to 90% of the stock's price. This poured gasoline on the fire. It drove prices to dizzying, unrealistic heights. The entire system was becoming a fantasy. A beautiful, dangerous fantasy. The bubble grew with each passing day. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. Companies with little more than a name and a nice-looking office. Stock prices began to soar. Radio Corporation of America, a favorite. It never paid a dividend, yet its stock price multiplied again and again. People weren't buying a business share. They were buying a ticket to a lottery. They were betting on belief itself. The higher the price went, the more people believed it would keep going higher. The logic was circular. It was fragile. Warnings existed. They were whispers in a hurricane. A few cautious voices tried to sound the alarm. They were dismissed as old-fashioned. They were called pessimistic. Who wanted bad news when the party was this good? The press cheered the bull market. Economists promised a new paradigm. Charles Mitchell declared the market perfectly sound. He lent aggressively to fuel speculation. The public trusted him. They trusted the system. Corruption wasn't hidden. It hid in plain sight. Investment trusts were created, like a basket of stocks. But nobody really knew what was in the basket. Managers could use the money to buy their own company's stocks, pushing prices up artificially. A merry-go-round of money, a self-fulfilling prophecy of wealth. The foundation was hollow. The facade was breathtaking. Summer of 1929 turned to fall. The market peaked. A moment of supreme confidence. The tower of cards stood tallest. Each card was alone. Each card was a secret. Each card was a hope unsupported by reality. The slightest breeze could bring it down. Men in smoke-filled rooms knew this. Some quietly began to sell. They had built the house. They knew when it was time to leave. The public, however, kept buying. Then the breeze came. It started in late October. A few bad days. Prices slipped. Confidence wavered. Then came Black Thursday. And then Black Tuesday. The selling began. Then it became a panic, a flood. The ticker tapes could not keep up. They ran hours behind. The numbers they printed were ghosts of a world that no longer existed. On the floor of the stock exchange, a roar of fear replaced the roar of greed. Men wept openly. Their life's work vanished in minutes. The crash on Wall Street hit Main Street like a tidal wave. People who had never owned a single stock lost everything. They lost their jobs as companies collapsed. They lost their homes when they could not pay the mortgage. They lost their savings when the banks failed. The banks had gambled with their money, and they had lost. Lines formed outside bank doors. People waited desperately to get their money out. But for many, the vaults were already empty. The money was gone. The jazz music stopped. The bright lights of the city seemed to dim. The parties were over. A silence fell over the once bustling streets. It was a silence of shock and of despair. The dream of endless wealth had ended in a nightmare of poverty. The men who had promised a new era of prosperity had vanished from the stage. The heroes of yesterday were the villains of today. The system they had celebrated had betrayed everyone. The fall was as swift and as brutal as the climb had been exhilarating. We look back now and see the rot that was there all along. We see the greed, the secrets, the deliberate deception. The crash was not an accident, it was an inevitability. It was the final act of a play written in the dark corners of power. The shiny city was a beautiful illusion. The true foundation was not built on steel and stone, but on the shaky ground of human weakness. Before the breadlines formed, the dust bowl swirled. The ground had already been poisoned. The corruption ran deeper than the deepest vault. Before the Great Depression, corruption ran deeper than you think.